Got it?
This meeting is being recorded.
So if you don't want your picture,
Got it.
turn off your video. If you don't want your name, oh, Mr. iPad, change your name. You could be Superman today. All right, now you can start over again with the movie.
And well, first
Or
we're going to
prayer.
start with an opening prayer. So as we settle into our present space, know with me that all is good, all is right, all is perfect. No matter what the outward appearances around us may have held for the day, right here, right now, in this moment, we are good, because this moment is all we have. I know as I speak the truth for myself that I speak it for each and every person that's in this meeting or shall participate in any way in the future with the meeting, whether it's in video format when you see this at some point, or however that may look. I know that to be the absolute truth, and I hold this as my principle, my heartfelt admiration, and knowing that God is all there is. I release my word into the law of promise, potential, and absolute goodness. And together we say, and so it is.
So it is.
Okay, so we did a little bit of conversation before we started the meeting tonight. And the thing I wanted to talk about, because I wanted tonight, because I like the holidays. I like Halloween, I like Christmas, and I like discussing the metaphysics around them. And lately, Brian and I have been watching old horror flick movies. And the one we watched the other night was really, 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 really bad. It was just so bad. 1930s or 40s probably. And the antagonist was called the Tingler. And after a bit of time of watching it, you realize that the Tingler was actually shaped like a human vertebrae, and it had these two little things, and then it had like a vertebrae body to it, and it would just kind of come out and it would wobble around, and it was funny. But then when they brought the principle of it, which of course I immediately caught on to, was that the human being that was creating it, it was created from within inside, which is the basis of tonight's topic, is where is the fear of things that are happening in and around us? Is it actually something that's stemming from outside of us, or are we fueling it by something we do from the inside? In this movie, the Tingler was actually the person's vertebrae that was actually being allowed to get outside of it to do harm to others and to the person that had the fear. And the thing that incapacitated it, when people did not hold the fear inside of themselves, and they would talk about it, and or in the case of the movie, scream. Because when you scream in fear, it will, many times, if you're on the street and being attacked or whatever, and you scream really loudly, the attacker will run away or stop what they're doing, or something will happen to assist you in alleviating whatever that fear happens to be presenting as. So with Halloween approaching, of course, people have a tendency to go into the fun elements of ghosts and goblins and witches and all of that. But at the same time, when you look at the world around us, and all the man-created events and situations and wars and economic situations and problems and all of that, when you go into them with a basis and principle of fear, as opposed to, okay, this is what's showing up today, tomorrow something else can happen. Having that little bit of hope many times is the release of the deep-seated fear that can sometimes make things worse. When you have when you consider how fear is created around many times news stories revel on fear. A lot of times people that want you to believe one thing, which isn't necessarily the truth, they use fear tactics to do that. We all know whatever situation we can think of, and so we're not going to go into detail on that. And at the same time, I want to bring that and for us to hone in on it. It's when we are, this is quote unquote, in life in a situation that's fear driven, how we respond or don't respond many times either will fuel the fear to happen or become worse, or if we remain calm or hopeful for the next thing to come along, it helps to alleviate the fear so that we can move forward and we're not paralyzed in that space. Getting into a rut that is fear-based can be just beyond detrimental. I mean, it can kill us, literally. We can get ourselves into situations where it can just destroy our lives and our lives as human beings. People have gotten themselves into situations that they weren't able to move beyond, and it allowed them to die. One of those, for instances, is there was a show last night that was a documentary about the last day of Pompeii when the mountain blew up, and they found out a lot more about it because of excavation. And this is just a new show that's new information showing that the mountain actually probably erupted in October rather than August, and there was a whole bunch of different things, but there was approximately about 2,000 people they've determined that because of their fear, they chose to go into their homes and try to protect themselves within their home, and they were just paralyzed in that position instead of taking the chance to flee. Or the fear for their children or their spouse or whatever it may have been, they opted to stay at their home or wherever they were, hoping to reunite with their families instead of saving themselves, which we can all relate to that, I have no doubt, because it's when you come down to the thing of, okay, my children, my grandchildren, my pets, whatever the thing you love most, you will allow the fear for them to paralyze you and make you do things that if it were just yourself that you were saving, you may have made a different choice. I think that the principal nature of spirit guides us into places and positions where we're supposed to be. I think that the people that perished in Pompeii, in the city of Pompeii, because they stayed put, that was ultimately their purpose, because they were supposed to show and educate later on, even though it's 2 millennia later, they're still educating us. So they still had a purpose. That's not saying that we have the free will to do what we need to do. So I think it's really important that we always identify the fears that show up and not necessarily let them control our lives and not live in fear. I'm notorious for saying things that I learned from my mom or my dad. And one thing that always comes to mind with fear for me is when I was growing up, we were supposed to go to Yellowstone Park. And for one reason or another, we didn't get to go when we were scheduled to go one summer on a trip. And that happened to be when the geyser Old Faithful had erupted and there was like all these problems and people got hurt and some died. I think I was pretty young, 7, 8 years old. And people were like, oh my gosh, what if that would have been, you would have been there? And my mom's response, well, we would have been there and we were supposed to be there, but we weren't supposed to be there. So I'm not going to worry about it. And that was pretty much how she lived her life. And my grandmother did too, her mother. And that's kind of been the principal nature of how I was raised, and the people around me had that attitude. My sister, on the other hand, who was raised in the same household, thrived on fear. Everything, she was always worrying, and it was always on the negative side. And it was ironic to actually watch her do it, especially after I started learning the science of mind techniques and principles. And I would watch her name and claim stuff and then draw it to her. And she drew it to herself. And she didn't have to. That was the part about it that it was just amazing to me to watch her pull negative stuff to herself from the things she would say and the things she would act on or worry about or put her energy behind. And that taught me so much about letting go. If you can't control it, just know it's going to be okay. Do what you can, but don't dwell on it. Don't give it more energy by dwelling on it. And a quick note, this week I had a little hiccup with the DelDOT, and the Delaware State is working on a road project in front of my house. And they're putting in new roads and an overpass and this, that, and the other. And they came in 2019 and we made a deal, and I saw the plans and this, that, and the other. And now the construction is actually happening years later. And all of a sudden there's a giant drain box in my front yard where there wasn't supposed to be one. And it showed up this past week and things started happening. And I could have went into the fear-based of, oh my God, they're going to run over me. They're going to take advantage of the situation. I'm going to be stuck with this, even though it wasn't on the original plan. You know, the whole I'm fighting the government kind of thing. And I did it for about 5 minutes a couple of times, and I caught myself doing it. And then I was like, nope, it's going to be all right. And we ended up having a meeting today, and they actually were great about it. They're trying to find a solution. They understand that they're actually liable for this situation because it's not on the chart. But at any rate, I didn't have to worry. And so as long as I focused on that, and as I was driving with Brian and I were going up to the meeting today at 1:00 at the property, and I was like, nope, it's going to be okay. It's all going to work out. However it works out, it's going to be fine. You know, we're going to come out of it just fine. It's going to work out. And sure enough, it has. And up to this point, we're good. And they're moving forward with a solution and trying to find a solution. So the point of the story is, had I wasted all the energy that I could have with negatives and worrying and letting the fear of what ifs, you know, I can create some major what ifs, but we generally create them on the negative side instead of on the positives. Sue Ellen and I had a couple of classes that we've done in the past years and years and years ago. Seems weird to say that now. That were about what ifs and how people always what if down instead of what if up. Like, what if you win the lottery tomorrow? What if you come into a great inheritance of money? Or what if, you know, something wonderful happens? Or any number of things. You can just imagine the great things that what ifs could be. But human nature, we have a tendency to do it the other direction. And that's pretty much the principle of the talk tonight, is making sure we're aware of our fears. Are they actually rooted in anything that's tangible? Is it something that we actually have any true control over changing? Or do we have to figure out a different way of looking at the situation, removing ourselves from the situation completely? What it is that we can actually do. And if we can't do anything, then why worry about it? just let it play itself out, holding that the highest and best will come. Sometimes that's all we can do when we're praying for other people, when they're in situations like the hurricane in Florida this past week, 3 weeks ago. You know, there were people that I knew down there, and all I could do was just hold the highest and best for them and that they were going to be okay. Amazingly enough, all the people that I directly know, and some of them were in Fort Myers, are actually pretty much unscathed. And some of them were in mobile homes. And their homes are okay, and they're in their homes right now, just getting their power back. But, you know, and the rest of the town is just devastation. And yet these people, that all I could do is hold the highest and best. And I know a lot of people know these same people that I do, and we were all just sending them like positive vibes. And it's hard not to think that that made a difference, you know, because positive vibes have the ability to turn a storm. I've seen it happen to myself in Oklahoma a couple of times. I've seen it happen with a home that I used to own in Paradise, California. That's one of the few still standing after the fire a few years ago. My house was one that survived. And it's not that I still own it, but I put so much energy and protection around it when I had it. I can't imagine that some of that still didn't hold over, because when I lived there, I knew at some point that town was going to burn. 10 years later, 15 years later, it did. But, you know, it's that when you know something's going to happen and it is tangible, that's an example of, okay, it's pretty safe bet. I'm going to go on the other side of the safe bet and go this way. And I remove myself from the situation. And my whole life has been a series of situations that I was able to either change my mind about, see it in a different way, allow it to play itself out, and know it's going to be okay, whatever that looks like, or removed myself from the situation beforehand because I listened to my intuitive nature. And that voice inside of me was like, move, or step this way, or step that way. And it's all about tuning in. You know, the good that's in us, we can tune into that just as easily as we can tune into the fear. Sometimes we get pushed into the fear a lot easier or faster for whatever reason. You know, painful things happen, and that makes us remember that, or whatever it is. There's always something behind that's a catalyst. But the bottom line is where we put our focus and what we focus in on is what's going to help to energize and create what the outcome of the situation is. So now I'm going to open it up for everybody else to chime in and let me know what you think of my perspective of fear. Anyone?
Me.
Lynn?
Yeah, I was taking notes on some things that were popping into my head. You know, the first thing that you mentioned really that kind of got me was the fear in the news and how do we respond to it. And the news media has such a way of presenting something that, well, everything is about ratings, right? So how can they present a story or an issue that's happening that's going to get people to come closer to the television, you know, and connect to their emotions? And so how do we respond to that? And I think I don't watch a lot of the news anymore. I know it happens and it's on all day because Bob will turn on MSNBC for 3 hours in the morning and CNN for the rest of the time until the baseball playoffs come on. So it's there. So I know what the stories are. And he'll say, you probably don't believe this because you're not reacting. And it's, you know, it's not that I don't believe it or not, but I'm not going to react in specifically a way that, you know, I'm looking at it first from a principle orientation because that's how my mind works. One of the great classes I took that actually Reverend Donald Graves created was, what's this? Contemporary Applications of Science of Mind. And the homework was to watch the news and to read news articles, and how did we respond to them? And what's the principle behind the action within the story? And that really did a lot for me, taking that class back then. The second thing I wanted to say was, over the last 2 years, I've listened to a lot of people who channel stories about their lives and other lifetimes. Not doing it so much now, but there was one gentleman in particular who remembered a lifetime of being one of the early Christians that were thrown into the Colosseum, or whatever the thing over there in Europe, where the lions would eat them because they were Christians. And the fear, the absolute fear of him and his family in one of these arenas, and then dying, from being killed. And in the moment of death, he was reminded that there's only love, that doesn't need to be a fear of death itself, because we continue. And that was his experience, to remember that we continue. And so no matter what the fear is, where is it coming and what is it doing? And that really love is so much stronger than anything that can scare us, if we just remember and stay there. And then there's also the thing about agreements. Like you said, in Pompeii, there are agreements, and remember, we made agreements, and we're in the right place at the right time. And it's really about love and all of it. And then the last thing was the 4 questions by Byron Katie.
Mhm.
When your question is, how do we respond to it? Are you familiar with those?
I've heard of it, yes.
Because
And Donna Grace, Donna Grace was at one of our meetings. Oh wow, I can't even remember if it was at the one of the gatherings with the Centers for Spiritual Living, or if it was for the one for up in Montana at Big Sky. But he was actually at one of the meetings, so I got to have a lot of one-on-one time with him talking. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, well, the questions are, anytime something works us, and whether it's fear or anxiety or whatever the situation is, I think these are really good with something that we hear that scares us. The first question is it true? And the second question is, can you absolutely know it's true? How do you react when you believe that thought? And who would you be without that thought? And then turning the whole thing around. So fear is an interesting thing, and it's hard to be in principle at the moment, because I think about, could I stay in the principle at the moment? Because I would sure want to, but I don't want to scare the shit out of myself practice, but I would hope that I could stay in principle, or at least come back to it very fast. Yeah.
Well, what you said was going back to what I was leading in with, was fear is a wonderful thing on so many levels, because it can save our lives. It can protect us, and at the same time it can kill us.
Yeah.
So it's very much a double-edged sword if you don't figure out how to navigate around and with it.
Yeah. And I think it's also a good tool after the fact to go into shadow work. That just kind of popped into my head. And what is it about self and lives and others with shadow work as well for healing? So,
well, that's identifying a situation and saying, okay, like I did with this week's scenario, when I let it go, and then I see, when I look back on it, it's like, yep, see, there was nothing to worry about. I took the right action, or I didn't react.
yeah. Okay. Well, that was me.
Thank you. Sue Ellen? You look primed to say something.
Not really.
No?
Nope, not really.
Joanne, if you would like to join in and say something, you're more than welcome. I can't see your face, but that's okay. There she is. Turn your mute off.
I came in a little bit late. I actually put
That's
a
okay.
question in the chat to follow up with something that Lynn had said. I was wondering what you meant by what would you be without that thought? Could you explain that further to me?
Yes, and I am actually giving you the website where to look up Byron Katie, and this is her main aspect of it's called The Work. And this is how she helps people change their lives, because we get so caught up in information and stories or fear, or things that control us. And it's really thought, right? Thoughts are things. And so her idea is to work out, do we really know this is true? And how does it connect for us? And I kind of lost myself here just a second. I don't want to take up Kevin's meeting, but
You're fine.
I did send you the website. So, what would you be without that thought? Was that your question? Let me go there again.
Right.
What would you do without the thought? And so if that wasn't controlling your life, who would you be? Would you then still be carrying on yourself as your true authentic self without being controlled by that thought?
Okay.
Yeah. And so I've put her website in the chat, the link that'll take you right to that page that explains and even goes through a dialogue
Okay. Thank you.
exercise.
And I might add that the double-edged sword idea kind of plays into that too, because sometimes the thoughts of fear are actually a positive thing and they're good for us ultimately. So when you identify as where would you be without it, the fear can keep us alive.
Mhm.
Or it can lead us into a situation which would just destroy us.
Yeah.
So I think that also comes into play in that question. It's like the fear can help us, because it can save our lives. It has. If we listen to the intuitive, especially when it's saying, step out of the way, fear of getting run over by a stampeding bull or a truck, or, those are those quick momentary reactions when fear actually is a very good thing to have. Jack, how are you doing?
Taking it all in.
Okay,
So,
that's okay.
yeah. Now, my life had its share of fear, especially beginning with polio at age 6, because there was the same kind of panic in that experience that was experienced, is experienced with COVID, and so it was. And it was also generated by the medical people, even though they tried not to, it was clear even as a 6-year-old that these people were afraid of something.
Right. It's true. So the one addition that I felt because of what Lynn shared was so many times our media will post these screaming headlines at us. And then when we actually go in and look at the story and then follow up with stories from other locations and sources, we find out that the headline that they were putting up to catch our attention, to get us to log in and pay attention to them, were less than accurate. Let's put it that way. So that's the important part about not just immediately reacting, but taking some time to ask the questions of, is this actually true? Is this, verifiable? And doing the work around that so that we know if we need to have a reaction to it, if it's something that isn't like an instantaneous, we got to react now to get out of the way, or it's something that we have time to make up our minds and decide whether we're going to fuel it or not. So.
Or do some research. We have time for that.
Right, exactly. I mean, if a truck's speeding at you and coming down the hill and you need to jump out of the way, you don't have time. But
Right.
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
But if it's a screaming headline, you probably do. There's not
Exactly.
clouds, dark black clouds in the sky. You probably have
Right.
time to do a little bit of research.
Exactly. If the warnings aren't screaming at you in Oklahoma saying, get into your cellar, there's a tornado coming now, you have time to go and check and make sure it's accurate. And you need to seek shelter somewhere.
I think it's also very interesting too. American news is very, as we've talked tonight, very sensationalized. It's really interesting. Sometimes my husband and I, we'll watch BBC News because
Mhm.
they just deliver the news. They don't try to sensationalize it. They just,
Yep.
it's there, and I think it's a good tool. If you can just, if you're going to use news as a tool,
Right.
that's one good option for you, is to, view it from different countries and how they present the news.
That's interesting. I like
I
that.
watch BBC at least once a day.
Mhm.
My news channel source is BBC once a day.
Huh.
So
It's
it's
very
either the
cool.
early or the late, because they're usually duplicated. The
Mhm.
early and late are almost always the same. But 9 times out of 10, the thing that I'm looking for affirmation from some other news story, it usually shows up. If it's real and true, it will show up in some form on BBC,
Interesting.
because they just tell you the news, and they don't, it's not
Yeah,
either direction.
they don't make commentary about it. They don't,
Right.
they
Exactly.
they deliver it in a very neutral way. And
Well,
very-
it's funny because I have friends that live in other countries, and when I was over in Prague in Czech Republic, I didn't get to see a lot of news, but people would say, "What is going on with your country?" And there's other countries that are far worse, of course, as far as what they put out, which is quote unquote propaganda. But yeah, they think it's so funny that we have so many news sources and they're just all over the board, from one end of the spectrum to the other. So hearing the outside world through filters through these people that I know from European countries and Australia and stuff, it's interesting, and it gives me a different perspective that way, because they're on the outside looking in. So it kind of gives me that different Alice in Wonderland view through the looking glass kind of thing. But so anyone else?
You started with Halloween
I did.
and some of the scary things and fear about Halloween. And I don't remember anything scary as a little kid with Halloween. We put on costumes and we ran around with our pillowcases to collect candy. And, that would last for months until the heaters in the floor would melt it all into your pillowcase. And then in the closet. Yeah. And then, but here, I'm in this little cow town, Justin, Texas, and I joined the library board last year. I thought that would be a good thing to kind of get involved in, and they really didn't do very much, and they only met 4 times a year, and I was totally kind of like, I just could not connect with this clique of women who'd been together for a long time. But they were getting towards, close to Halloween, and they said, we closed the library for 2 days and we set up a haunted house in our library, and you can help us with that. And she goes, here's one of the coolest things we have. Here's our room with all of our stuff. And I'm looking at all the Halloween decorations, and I see this giant statue kind of thing. And I said, what is that? She goes, oh, that's really cool. It's a ghoul like from hell, and it's holding up a little child, and you turn it on and there's smoke that comes from the child, and it's the ghoul sucking the soul out of this little girl, and she's screaming. And I lost it. I lost it. That to me wasn't funny. And it
Right.
wasn't, and it was a little scary. And I, to be honest with you, I've done some research about some things that do kind of go on that scare people. And
Right.
that was not funny. And I said, are you sure you're putting that up? She goes, oh, it's great. Kids love it. And I said, I quit today, right now. That's not me. I don't want to be a part of that. You really don't know what you're doing. And I walked right out, and I probably overreacted a little much, but it scared my heart and my soul. I couldn't do that.
Right.
And just the way I feel about life and love and soul and oneness and all of that, it was like, no, that's not funny. And I had to come home and work on myself for a long time about that. Not just my reaction, but that people think that's funny. And that's
the thing about Halloween, is it's meant to be fun, ultimately. that may not be where it stems from originally. People will have discussions about where Halloween comes from, and that's all fine and good. But when I was a kid, like you, Lynn, mom would take us to neighborhoods in town because we lived out in the country. So we'd go into neighborhoods in town where we knew a few people, and we'd just run up and down the blocks and get our loot of candy and all that. We were not allowed to eat anything until we came home and looked through it, because then the fear was there could be needles in it, little pins, because people would do that.
Yeah.
People found razor blades. We lived in a small town. Chances of it happening in a small town in southern Idaho, very slim to none. But the fear was there because it was put out in the news that this had happened somewhere.
Yeah.
And of course, people chose to pick that up, and that became a fear-based thing with the holiday involved. And of course, all the horror films and everything else that Hollywood has managed to create, that, you know, some of them are so off the wall that they're just not possible. But then they get some that are so close to reality that it's like, okay, that could actually be real. And those are the ones that I get a little, I'm like, oh, because, you know, it's just something that's out there. And again, if you let the fear run your life, you'll miss out on so many of the good things. So you have to ask, is this true? Is this like the fear of going somewhere where there could be an earthquake or a volcano erupting, or, you know, your timing. It's so much about spiritual timing. Like my mom used to say was, you know, if it's my time to go, I'll be on the plane that goes down. You know, I'll be near the volcano that erupts, or whatever it is. That's kind of her philosophy. And, you know, so many times that's been the thing that keeps me kicking and going around and flying all over the place and grabbing the bull by the horn, so to speak.
Yeah.
And taking
And
the
blessing
adventure
the
of
airplane.
life. And taking the adventure of life. What's that?
Yeah. And blessing the airplane.
Exactly. I've been on rough flights and I've got my eyes closed and I'm just seeing me sitting in God's hands, and I'm seeing like the plane landing safely and me at my destination walking into the airport, and, you know, whatever it takes, you know, who knows.
That's
But
right.
it's truly a personal choice. And, you know, fear is a personal choice, and we each have to choose how much we're going to allow, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Like you said, Lynn, with the questions that we have to ask ourselves. How much power does it actually have, or does it have any at all? Or are we worrying about something that is absolutely nothing? It's just a what if. Letting the what ifs control you can be very damaging.
Yeah.
Unless you're what ifing up. I like the what if ups.
Yep.
Me too.
So we're at 7:40. Anybody have anything else they want to add? Cool, good. Okay, so I'm going to invite you to close your eyes with me. We're going to do a little impromptu meditation. And it's going to be guided. I'm going to speak. Not a lot, just a little. But as we take deep breaths in and we release, take another deep breath in, knowing that as we breathe in the power that is God. The air that fills our lungs is God. The thing that keeps our bodies mobile, energized, is God. And with each breath we take in, we are inhaling that God and pulling that God into our souls, into the core of our being. The molecular structure of our bodies at the very core level is regenerated by every breath we take. And as we take in those breaths, we allow ourselves to relax. And in the relaxing process, we allow ourselves to release all sense of emotions and just be present. Be in the moment, right here and right now. Allowing that breath of air to fill our bodies, releasing all tension, all anxiety, all fear, and even the feelings of joy and happiness and all those things will also go away, because we're just simply in the moment, right here and right now, allowing our bodies to be re-energized, renewed and refreshed. The breath of God coming into us, and that same God coming out of us, taking out of us all the things that are negatives, helping our body to be even more whole and complete, if that's possible in the moment. Our mental state, our emotional state, our physical state, our well-being, the ability for our lungs to breathe in easily, filtering out anything that may be in the air that we don't need, and just allowing the goodness of God to flow into our bodies. Knowing that sometimes it only takes 3 or 4 minutes of doing this, taking a moment in a situation and just knowing the truth and breathing in and exhaling. Knowing in all situations that there is only God. There is only God in, through, and as each one of us. All of the things that we encounter. As the quote is stated from God, I am that I am. Simple statement. Whatever it is that you see, experience, encounter, I am that I am. God's proclamation to us that He is in that situation, that circumstance, that emotion, that feeling within. And it all does start within each one of us. As we take another deep breath in, I want you all to say, I am that I am.
I am.
Remind yourselves
I am.
of that truth.
I am.
I am that I am.
I am.
Breathe in and breathe out. And when you're ready to open your eyes and come back into the space, you can do so. One practice that I would invite each of you to consider doing is something that I did with Sue Ellen, again, forever ago. And it was taking that statement of I am and applying it to yourself. I am, and identify something that is your trait, something that's good within you that you can see in something that you see outside of yourself. It doesn't have to be another person, doesn't have to be in a living plant or thing. For example, you can be walking down the street and see a beautiful big landscape boulder, and you can look at that and say, I am, and identify something that you see. I'm solid. I'm steady. I'm, if it's a telephone pole, I'm towering. Identify something that's positive in that thing that you're seeing, name it and claim it, because it's something that you can identify within yourself. This is one of the best ways to connect to that powerful you that you are. And it's one of the simplest practices to do. And just without even thinking about it, walking in the stores, walking down the street, and just in your mind, just think about that. I am that, whatever that may be that you see. And just identify something about that thing that you're seeing. You know, it might be an angry dog that's guarding a child. I am that protective. I am that. You know, it can be anything. So expand your imagination and let it run wild. So that wraps it up for me today. I'm going to do the texting is love. Get it in the camera there. There we go. I still have the same one because my husband Brian made this for me months and months and months ago, and I've held on to it because it's so cute and clear. So that way we keep this going, and Inner Journey continues to thrive in Oklahoma and beyond, wherever we happen to be. I know I'm in Delaware, Lynn's in Texas. Jack, you're in Texas now still?
Nope, it's Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City. Joanne, you're in
Arkansas.
Arkansas. I know we have one that's not with us tonight, and she's between Arkansas and Colorado,
Yeah.
and a handful of others that are all over the place. So, Sue Ellen, would you like to lead us out for releasing us from prayer into prayer?
Sure,
Pray us out.
I can do that. As I stop and take a breath, I recognize that there is only God, and God has been with us, is always with us in this day. And I feel honored and blessed and full of love and full of gratitude for all of the fears that I have released as we've been talking, for the knowledge that I don't have to pick them up again, that I can really let them go. And I am grateful for this time, for these people that spent this time with me. And I know that when we meet again, that we will be there in love and harmony and joy, in gratitude. And we learn as we grow. And I am grateful for that. And so I give thanks for this time, for these wonderful people, for this special evening, and especially for Kevin and his message, and for each participant and their words. And I release this thought, this prayer, this idea into the mind of God, knowing it is done, complete, and blessed. And so it is.
And so it is.
And so it is.
Thank you. That
Thank
was
you.
You're
wonderful.
welcome. Thank you.
Everyone, it's so good to see you.
Yes,
I've
good to
missed all of
see
you.
you.
I haven't been able to be on all the time, and I miss everybody and all your faces. So it's a good thing.
All right. I'm gonna
Joanne,
stop
Jack,
recording.
nice to see you again. Lynn, talk to you soon. Sue Ellen,
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night.